It is such a joy to be with you all. And yes, that really threw me when my son did the introduction that way. And I have to tell you, my parents also were at that graduation, and they howled. They thought that was wonderful. I don't even think of myself as that much of a writer and speaker because my husband has done so much more, and you know, he has 40 books and I only have 6 or 7. But I guess other people don't always have 6 or 7 books they've written. So yeah, I write books. And I'll just mention it because it won't come across my mind probably at the end. I have a 4-book set on Proverbs 31, and it kind of goes through the life of a Catholic wife and mom. I would say men have benefited from the marriage book and the children's, raising children with legacy of love, but especially it's written from my heart to the heart of my sisters in Christ. And so Chosen and Cherished is focused on marriage. Graced and Gifted is biblical wisdom for the homemaker's heart, just going through the stuff we do and the spiritual lessons we can learn from cleaning and cooking and organizing and decorating and gardening and all that. Beloved and Blessed is being open to life and then what do you do with the children up to about age 11. And then Legacy of Love is parenting teens and young adults and becoming a mother-in-law. I actually wrote a chapter on that. There's hardly anything out there. And I even had a daughter-in-law look it over. Is this okay? And then becoming a grandmother. So at this point we have 6 children. We only will have 6 children. What do I mean at this point? That will not change. Michael, Gabriel, Hannah, Jeremiah, Joseph, and David. And our 3 oldest, Michael, Gabriel, and Hannah, are married, and our 17th and 18th grandbabies are due in early May. We actually had 4 grandbabies miscarried last year. So even though we have, received so many of these precious children, it's been a tough year. So we are looking forward to May. 2 little girls due within 3 days of each other. And, I believe that these little ones in heaven are praying for us. They do have a profound impact on our lives. And we have 3 that we miscarried. So I've already entrusted this day to my children and my grandchildren who I think are in the presence of our Lord, asking them to pray for me today. Our next 2 sons, Jeremiah and Joseph, are both studying at Sacred Heart Seminary for the Diocese of Steubenville. And it is a tremendous privilege and really a new venture for Scott and me to think through what it is, especially in this day, to have sons step forward and say, I will be a spiritual father to your people. And I would really ask for your prayers for all seminarians, but especially for our Jer and Joe, that they would follow Christ with abandon, and that he will give them wisdom to know how to become spiritual fathers in a profound and new way. And then we have a 19-year-old who isn't sure what he's going to do. His seminarian brothers keep saying, come on, 3 married, 3 priests, 3 married, 3 priests. I said, no one pressured you, you can't pressure him. But he has his father's heart, and I think he's going to get married. I think he, as one of my children who married told me at age, I think 8, he said I was made for a woman. So anyway, God will do what God will do, and we will wait and see what happens. There was a priest who was talking to a First Communion class, and he said at one point, what did Jesus say about marriage? And at first, all the little eyes go to the floor and the wall, don't pick me. And then all of a sudden, in the back of the room, this little boy raises his hand, he says, Father, Father. And he says, yes, what did Jesus teach about marriage? He said, Father, forgive them, they do not know what they do. There is something to that. There is something to that. We had no idea what we were getting into. And yet I can say with deep conviction, the mercy of God has been at work in our hearts, in our lives, in our relationships. It is very much on the job training, but he is there waiting to help us. Marriage is the only institution that wasn't lost in the flood. Sorry, wasn't lost in the fall, and it wasn't washed away by the flood. That's really beautiful. In the marriage ceremony, who are the ministers? It's actually the bride and groom. It's actually the bride and groom. So when my husband became Catholic, he asked the priest, do I need to get remarried in the church to my wife? And he said no, because neither of you were Catholic. You were both baptized, and so you have had a valid and sacramental marriage, even though you didn't know it was a sacrament. And it's interesting because my father, who's a Presbyterian pastor, as are both my brothers, when my dad married us, he said, you are the primary channel of grace, God, for Kimberly. And Kimberly, you are the primary channel of God's grace to Scott. And he really was communicating a very Catholic idea. That we are the primary channels of grace to each other in the mercy of God. The vocation to marriage is not a general call. My son David will only know he's called to marriage when there is a specific woman. I was not called to marriage, I was called to Scott. And he is my vocation. Each of us in marriage has a very essential role in the salvation of the other. Now, we are saved by Christ. Let's be real clear about that. We are saved by Christ. But in Christ's plan, I have a profound role in Scott's walk with our Lord, and likewise he with me. This is one of the most profound ways in which in our marriage we reflect to the world the relationship between Jesus Christ and the church. Grace flows from Christ to the church, and then the church dispenses grace to the glory of God. And likewise, mercy flows from a husband to a wife and together to the children. We mediate that grace to the glory of God, and it is a living witness, a living testimony to our coworkers, to our neighbors, to those who we meet in random places, and to our extended family to whom we're deeply committed. Now, when we said our vows, did we know what we were saying? I have to tell you, having watched 3 children get married, I can tell you they have no clue. And I don't think I had much of a clue. But you don't have to understand the depths of what that vow is going to mean before you can say I do. Okay? So I want to kind of walk through the vow. What is it that we said? We committed ourselves in joy and in sorrow. And honestly, this is how I think my children heard it, and probably how I heard it. In joy and in sorrow. In sickness and in health. For richer, for better, or for worse. Okay. Now I have a question before we go further, and then I want to walk through this vow. I want to ask you to stand up if you have been married at least 5 years. And I am including anyone who's been married at least 5 years. Okay, so we've got a lot of long-time marriages here. How about stay standing if you've been married 10 years? How about 15 years? How about 20 years? 25 years? 30 years? 35 years? 40 years? 45 years? 50 years? 55 years? 60 years? How long have you been married? 61 years. I'm sorry. We want to give you credit for every year. 62 years. How many years?
64.
64. Absolutely. Okay, I want to tell you something. In my notes it says they will clap. know why? Because we know what it takes to be faithful. This is not an easy path. For people who think, I want to, do something great for God, but I don't think I can do consecrated life. I guess I'll just get married. This is a great thing for God. My parents have been married 62 years. It'll be 63 in the fall, God willing, if they both live. Do you imagine what it takes to be faithful to the vow that long? I tell my children when they celebrate the first birthday of any of their children, this really is more for you. You survived how many more sleepless nights? The child is still alive. You've done a great job. The child may not remember the birthday, but you have survived that first year. And we need to celebrate the anniversaries because it is a true witness to the mercy of God. And we don't do everything right. We go to confession and have a lot to say, right? We need grace to be able to do this, but we can do this. And our world is desperate to understand how in the world you could be faithful to one person for 60 years. There is grace in time of need. And we pledge ourselves to the one who is the source of that grace. We do not know the future. Our lives could be in upheaval for any number of reasons tomorrow. But we know the one who knows the future. And that's the one on whom we place our trust. I think Scott is very trustworthy, and I do trust him. But my confidence is in Christ. He is the one who can weather every storm with us. And I do believe by the grace of God, Scott will be a strength and support to me in tumultuous times. But ultimately, my confidence is not in Scott, it is in our Lord. So let's look at some of these vows. In joy and in sorrow. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. This is the art of coming alongside each other, like the Holy Spirit, the Comforter. And we need to make a decision in the day. When our spouse gets home or when I go out to my spouse, am I willing to extend myself? If I've had a great day and he's had a tough day, am I ready to listen and absorb some of that difficulty, some of that tension? Or on the flip side, if I've had a difficult time, can I enter into his joy and can he come alongside me and help bear some of that burden? Sometimes we need a problem solver, someone who comes up, whoops, that's okay, I got that. Sometimes we need a problem solver, and sometimes we just need arms wrapped around us. Now, out of Scott and me, I tend to be a little more analytical. I tend to be a little more of the problem solver, and it's a little bit of a role reversal sometimes, but at times I can say, well, I think you need to meet with this person and do this and this, and he said, I'd like a hug. I don't want to solve, I'm not looking for a solution. I just want to know you're going to pray for me. It's like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can do that. Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. This is a call to follow Christ with focus, to determine that we will serve rather than be served. And we express mercy in marriage by expressing love in all its forms. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages? Okay, a lot of you, that's awesome. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. My parents stumbled onto it after they had been married 40 years, and it actually had a tremendous impact on their marriage. They shared the book, they bought it for all of us. I have 4 siblings and we're all married. They gave all of us a copy of the book, and they shared that how it had changed their marriage, which was a great marriage, but got even stronger. So in summary, there are 5 primary ways in which we express love and tend to receive love. It isn't always exactly the same, but the 5 are words of affirmation, acts of service, gift giving, physical touch and closeness, and quality time. Now, how it had an impact on my parents was, my dad's primary love language is words of affirmation. When they were out in public, my mom could hear lots of people telling my dad how wonderful he is, and he is wonderful. And in her mind, she thought, well, he doesn't need to hear it from me because he hears it all the time. And that is not her primary love language, so it's not what she sits around the house trying to think about ways that she could tell him how wonderful he is. She does think he's wonderful. She just doesn't put it into words. Her primary love language was quality time. To feel loved. She didn't want to hear how wonderful she was, which was the tendency of my dad to tell her, because that was his love language. She wanted to see a difference in his schedule. Like, could they work out a date now that all the kids were gone, you know? Was she important enough to plan time with? So as they began to talk, they realized ways they had missed each other. And he could say to her, yes, many people tell me good things about me, but no one's opinion matters more than yours. I need to know that you think good things about me. And she was able to say, I need to fit in your schedule without asking for a spot in your schedule. And he said, well, let's start having a regular date night. And immediately he changed his schedule. And she had to write down, tell Jerry how wonderful he is, because she didn't tend to think that way. But as they spoke the language of love that the other really craved, they were communicating love better. And I would love to go into more detail. I actually helped a couple reconnect. They were engaged, they were going to get married in 6 weeks. And they said, I know we have a love for each other, but I don't even feel like I'm in love anymore. And what are we doing? I mean, her wedding dress was hanging in the closet, the invitations were literally stamped and ready to go in the mail, and they broke off the engagement. She and I were getting together. I had just read this book. And we met, and I said, is it possible, they had a long engagement, like a year and a half. I said, is it possible that you are no longer speaking the love language of the other? And so as we talked about it, she realized quality time was very high for her, but he was doing 2 jobs to get enough money so that they actually could get married. So he didn't have much time, and when they got together, it was like wedding prep and going through the punch list. And his was words of affirmation, and she was irritated that he wasn't making time for her. So when they did have limited time, she was more critical, which is the very antithesis of words of affirmation. And all I said was, is it possible that you do really love each other, but you've gotten into a rut where you're not hearing each other? And so anyway, she read the book, handed it to him, and just said, would you please just read this book? And 2 weeks later, we were at Mass at the university, and I get this little tap on the back of my shoulder, and she's like, and everything was back on, and I've now run into them 10 years after they got married, and they both just said, thank you, we would have missed the love of our life because we didn't realize how we had stopped speaking love into each other's hearts. And I'm very grateful. I got to play one little role, and that was one little book, but it did make a significant difference. To younger couples, I just want to offer up a handful of thoughts. Still listen to your spouse well when you feel talked out by a very verbal child all day, or apparently men have fewer words than women do in a day, and maybe you've been talked to a lot at work. You still need to really have conversation together. Affirm each other. Even if you don't feel appreciated that day, affirm the other. Touch. Be open to touch. Speak that language of love. I can tell you, when you have been touched all day long by very little children, you can, as a mom, you can have maxed out. There was one night where Scott came down, I could tell he had just figured out that I had gotten all the kids down. He comes down, and I'm sitting in a dark living room. And he said, hey, can I flip on the light? And I'm like, no. And he said, are you free? And I said, no. I said, well, can I put on some music? He said, no. I want to sit in the dark. I want no one to touch me for 30 minutes. Then I'll be okay. And I just took 30 minutes to think, to pray, to be in my own space, and then I went up to his office and we began to talk. We have to figure out when we have maxed out and to be able to communicate that, but at the same time, be sensitive to the needs around us. It's okay to be honest and to be able to regroup, but then make sure that you come back together, that you express that love together. It's never too late. Okay, I need to move on. Proverbs 31:12. This is describing the godly woman. She does him, meaning her husband, she does him good and not harm all the days of her life. And I try to tell my children who aren't married, which is now really just David because the guys are in seminary and very focused on priesthood, you do good for your future spouse now by being chaste, by pursuing purity. You are loving that individual now. So she does him good and not harm all the days of her life, both before she's married to him and after. And to do good and not harm emotionally means you don't belittle each other's dreams. You forgive genuinely without giving the silent treatment or building a case against the other. You build bridges with your beloved's family. In-law relationships are so important. And as spouses, each of us needs to reach out to the in-laws family to make sure that you are connecting, that you are loving your spouse by loving her or his mother, father, siblings. Demonstrating respect. One of our family rules from the get-go was we never joked about separation or divorce. I'd leave you. We were with a couple and this girl said, you know, I'd leave you over that, ha ha ha. And Scott and I just looked at each other, and when they walked out the door, we said, absolutely never. You never joke about something like that. Okay, let me move on to sickness and in health. Most people enjoy very good health in the early years of marriage. Now, some don't, but many do. Caring during illness, especially into older age, requires such a commitment, and we have no idea what we will face. Disabilities can be temporary or illnesses can be chronic. Part of growing in holiness now is a preparation for later. If we think of it like a marathon, you know, nobody walks out the door and says, I think I'll go run a marathon today. They build up for it. My husband says we are here to get out of here. Why do we have life and breath today? Because there's a purpose for our life today. And we are preparing always for the challenges that are ahead. If we are suffering right now, it's one of those warm-ups. It's one of those short races to get us ready for the marathon. If we're not suffering at the moment, it's a lull, okay? It doesn't mean that we're living the blessed life. It means we're at a pause. And will we take the time to realize we're at that pause so we gain all the benefit we can from what was so tough, so crushing, so difficult, so that we're ready for whatever the next challenge is. There's so many temptations in the midst of suffering, aren't there? Self-pity, blaming God, doubting God's love and care, becoming overly sensitive to criticism or perceived criticism, frustrations with limitations, maybe frustration over being dependent on someone else, depression, and even despair. I want you to think for a moment about Job's wife. We do not even know her name. She lost everything Job lost. All 10 children, all of their servants except the ones that fled to the house to tell the horrible things that had happened, all of the crops, all of the livestock. And through all of that loss, we don't hear her say anything to her husband that's negative or positive. We don't hear from her. But at the point that her husband's body gets covered with boils, she despairs. She says, give up. Curse God and die. At that moment, and on the one hand, I want you to appreciate her suffering, okay? Because she lost all the same things that Job did. But at the point where she needed to be a strength to him, because he was the one physically suffering now with these boils, she fails him as a wife. She didn't have to solve it. But she needed to sit next to him and just weep with him. And yet she gives in to despair. And then he rebukes her. You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. We don't know her faith. But there's no evidence that she wasn't a faith-filled, godly woman. Satan refers to Job as a righteous man when he comes before God, asking if he can tempt him in all these ways. But as far as we know, she was faith-filled. And yet at this crucial moment, she lets him down. Now, I would like to think that she repented, because there's no passage in the rest of Job that talks about him remarrying. And if you remember what the blessing was at the end of the whole thing, when Job is absolutely, utterly laid low, and his challenge to God is answered like, where were you when I created this world? You know, putting him in his place. Like, yes, you are suffering, and yes, I'm testing your faith, but you know what? You are not God. And Job pulls back and humbly receives that rebuke from Almighty God. And then God restores everything to him. I'm thinking the good news is, Job says to his wife, God's going to give everything in abundance back to us. The tough news, you're going to have 10 more. I can see. 10 more deliveries. Because he did. He actually restored and gave them 10 more children. God has a sense of humor, I think. But we need to guard our hearts toward temptations at the end of life. Our world says pain is useless. Suffering has no meaning. What we need to say is it's sin that has no meaning. Suffering has a lot of meaning, because it's conforming us to our Lord, and it's conforming us to his mother. The world says we ought to relax on our views on euthanasia and assisted suicide and suicide. And yet these are the moments when our faith comes down to a point, and we've got to be ready to speak the truth into darkness, into that suffering. And we certainly know that in crisis pregnancy, we're being told lies, and I am so grateful for the witness of our church that all life is to be protected from conception to natural death. And we've got to speak this truth into our culture. I think St. John Paul II was such a profound witness, and I remember being in his presence as that Parkinson's was really taking over. You know, when I met him the first time, he was standing and he was greeting two of my older sons and my husband and me, and he was walking around the room, and just a strong handshake. And then the last time I was with him, and we brought our youngest children, in fact David was a baby, and he kissed him on the cheek. He couldn't even stand, his head was to the side, he shook a little bit, and it was like, oh, it was so hard to see this dynamic man's body failing him, and yet his spirit was so strong, so strong. God's strength is made powerful in our weakness. It's the opposite of what our world says, which is you're to look young and vibrant and beautiful, and then they set people aside who don't fit that. We've got to think clearly about it. St. Paul writes in Colossians 1:24, now I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake. And in my flesh I complete what is lacking in Christ's afflictions for the sake of his body, that is the church. We are really united to Christ. So really, as his body, that our suffering united to his is salvific. We don't know what consequence it will have. We're like a cell in the body. We're one part, but our suffering is I do not want this to go to waste, but I couldn't think of one conversion I wanted to pray for, or one child that needed help. I couldn't think of a prayer. I don't know if you've been in that kind of intense situation, but you can shove that pain toward our Lord, toward Our Lady, and they will do something powerful with it. And on the other side of this life, we're going to find out what. Now, we said in sickness and in health, and I'm just going to mention a couple things about health. Proverbs 15:7 says this: better is a dinner with herbs where love is than a fatted ox with hatred with it. It's better to have a little bit of peace in your home and to share a simple meal than to worry about having this elaborate meal where you're not in right relationship. If you sit down to a meal and you're tense, you don't even feel hungry. But something as simple as hot dogs and mac and cheese, shared with love, makes you feel great and share hearts, not just a meal. I think we need to resist the temptation to not look our age. It's really funny when you hear an actress talk about their bravery in not undergoing plastic surgery. The courage it takes. And it's like, oh my gosh, really? You actually are your age. It doesn't matter what you look like. My grandchildren find it funny that my hair's turning gray. And it's like, you know, I've earned these gray hairs. I don't mind. My mom is 80. She'll be 85. She's 85. She'll be 86 this year. And she says to me, I wouldn't want to be any younger because someone would be missing. They have 28 grandchildren. I believe they're going to be at least 25 grades by her birthday. It's a great age to be, because I can attest to the mercy of God. I think two words that should never be put together are sexy and mom. Unless, of course, it's your husband. But aside from that, that shouldn't be a goal. Or how about this? Buff grandma. Grandmas are just supposed to be soft. They're supposed to be soft. I forgot which child, but one child said, I just like your squishy parts. We want to take care of our bodies to be able to serve our Lord well and to serve our families well, but not to try to turn heads. The only head I want to turn is my beloved's. That's it. Proverbs 16:24, pleasant words are like honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. I'll share one idea that my parents happened onto when I was in junior high school, and it changed our dinner time. We do it in our home, our children do it in their homes, and it's sharing a good thing. Everyone is to share one good thing from the day. What they realized was that I was very talkative. I'm sure that's hard to imagine. And I had a sister under me who's just as talkative, and then we had a brother who was very content to sit on the sidelines and just watch it all. But they never knew what was going on in his mind. And so when Dad heard this idea, he shared it with Mom, and then we instituted it every dinner. If you couldn't come up with a good thing, you had to put a quarter in the pot. And as far as I know, no one's ever had to pay a quarter. What we found was even little ones at 18 months, 20 months caught on, and they would say, my good thing, and everybody got quiet, and they got to share something. Now, for years, David's good thing was Mass and dinner, because I think it's all he could remember from the day. So now he jokingly says it's his good thing of the day, and then he shares other things. But it keeps the conversation positive. It's uplifting. And usually, if there are enough people around your table, you never get to the bad things of the day over dinner because everyone's sharing. Now we record on Sundays the best thing of the week, and it's been wonderful to have that record. When my sons write in it, we're more likely to actually be able to remember what they are because they have better handwriting than I do. But it's a new tradition that we've done now for 15 years to record the good thing of the week. Okay, let me move on. For richer or for poor. 1 Timothy 6:6-10 says this, there is great gain in godliness with contentment, for we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of the world, but if we have food and clothing, with these we shall be content. For the love of money is the root of all evils. Now catch that difference. It's not that money is the root of all evils, it is the love of money. that desiring. That's what I need to be at peace. So, how do we do this? Well, we work on a budget. We talk to each other about financial matters. A lot of times people will say to me, young people will say, I don't have enough money to do a budget. They think that it's not possible. If they look at how bad their financial situation is, they're going to drown, so they're just going to drown without knowing, gosh, that's going to happen. It's like, no, you need to set goals. You need to figure out what is the debt that we're looking at. How can we have less debt? How can we begin to work toward bigger goals that will give financial stability? There's nothing wrong with managing money. In fact, I think it's a very important thing in terms of stewardship. Again, we tithed on whatever we earned. Not gifts, but what we earned. And that was really hard early on because we earned so little and we needed every penny. But we just said, we are going to honor Christ and give him 10% off the top, not post-taxes, off the top. And I can tell you that the Lord blessed that. I remember one time in an entire month, our tithe was $5. And I remember thinking, we will never be too poor to give to God. Now, $5 was almost nothing. But for us, it was so much. I knew that blessed the heart of my Savior. And I thought of the widow's mite. She only had a mite, which is a fraction of a penny. But when she put in her mites, Jesus said she gave everything. And that was worth so much more than the wealthy people who were just throwing in excess they wouldn't even miss. They wouldn't even miss. Philippians 4:11-13, not that I complain of want, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. In any and all circumstances, I've learned the secret of facing plenty. Isn't that an interesting concept? Facing plenty and hunger, abundance and want. I can do all things in him who strengthens me. The balance is our focus on our Lord. Now, I tell you this, we had, the kids' first allowance was a dime, and I would give them a nickel and 5 pennies, because I wanted them to take 1 penny, which was 1/10, to Mass, and they would put that penny in the plate. And they thought that was pretty cool. You know, they put the 9 cents in their bank, and they would take the 1 penny. And then as we developed a budget, and I go into detail in Beloved and Blessed, how you can have a child manage a budget, starting at age 8, they would have more money. And 10% went into savings, 10% went into tithe, and then the other was spent in various ways. And one of my older children said, now let me get this straight. So someday if I earn $100, I'm going to give God 10? And I said, and you will get to manage 90. And he said, and if I earn 1,000, I'm going to give God 100? I said, if God lets you earn 1,000, yes, you will give him 100, and you will get to spend 900. And it was like, wow. What a concept. Great idea to start small, because it's like building up a muscle. Yes, this is what I'm going to do. And of course, almsgiving is to be beyond the tithe. Our hope and goal is that we will get to the point where we can give more than 10%. Okay, I've meddled in that enough. I'll let that sit. Let's move on to better for worse. Romans 15:1. We who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves, including our spouse. Socks strewn about the room is not a sin, even if it's a challenge. We do need to pick up on cues with each other and accommodate the idiosyncrasies we can. I thought this was scathingly brilliant. Someone told me that it drove them crazy that their spouse squeezed the toothpaste in the middle, the tube. Every day I go in there, it's mushed in the middle, and I said, can you buy a second tube of toothpaste? I mean, you will buy a second tube of toothpaste. You're just going to buy it a little earlier. He's got his, you've got yours. Oh. I mean, we solved that in like $1.10. Now, I would tell you, putting down the seat on the toilet's a little trickier. I cannot tell you the rage that can leap it to my heart in the middle of the night. As I dropped that extra amount, it's like, come on, work with me here. How about hair in the sink? Can we take a moment to take a tissue and clean it out? They're little things. We should pick up on the cues. We can do what we can to make life easier for each other. We need to bear with failings and weaknesses, to forgive a mother-in-law who didn't train her husband in certain things, as I know my in-laws have had to forgive me for not training my children in certain things. And I'll just make one comment about hormones. In terms of PMS or menopause or pregnancy and delivery, gentlemen, if you notice something, use that knowledge wisely. The goal is not to put it in her face, but to figure out how to accommodate at that moment, and then at a time when it won't produce irritation, to bring it up. Now, I did not excuse my daughter's behavior when PMS was on the table, but at the same time, timing is everything. I came out to the kitchen. We had not only 5 sons, 1 daughter, but we also had a lot of men live with us, students. And actually, the one who's living with us right now is either our 51st or 52nd student. So in our years in Steubenville, it's been one of our deepest joys. Some of you know some of the people who lived with us, Ted Stree and Tim Gray and Curtis Mitch and Curtis Martin and Michael Barber, and all kinds of wonderful, wonderful theologians who are doing great works for our Lord. So it was a man's world in our home. And I come out to the kitchen, and you can just feel this something emanating from my daughter. Just this irritability and irritation. And I could tell my husband really didn't know what to do about it. And I just looked at Hannah and I said, sweetheart, do we need to have a conversation? And she said, no. It's okay. She walked out of the kitchen, and Scott said, what was that? And I said, we just had the conversation we're not going to have, and everything has changed. I did not follow that. What does that mean? She did not want me calling her out in front of them, but she was definitely emoting because of all the hormone stuff. And she got a grip and walked out, and she was fine. So we want to use the knowledge wisely. There are hormone shifts that happen in our bodies. We don't even always understand when we're emitting certain emotional vibes and things. But 1 Corinthians 13:5, love is not irritable or resentful. And so to the best of your ability, gentlemen, if you can utilize that knowledge wisely, and love your wives, love your daughters, and you may live in a woman's world. I don't know how many daughters you may have. You may have a lot of emotion flying around. You be that steady person, and at the right time, then call them on to greater holiness too. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about conflict resolution and anger management, because I think this is part of the better or for worse. Love and anger can be very close companions. They do both express, I care. But anger can be maybe the most troublesome emotion in family life. Anger can characterize our homes as places of tension, unresolved conflict, defensiveness, hurt, or even abuse. Proverbs 15:18 says this, a hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. And I've tried to challenge my sons. There can be justifiable anger, but know how large you are, how deep your voice. You need to communicate respect, even in the midst of conflict. Ephesians 4:26 and 27 says, be angry but don't sin. Do not let the sun go down in your anger and give no opportunity to the devil. So it is possible to be angry and not sin, but we all know how challenging it is. We also have to understand that the evil one is always looking for a hook. He's always looking for a way to tear us apart, to break us down. The idea of a holy marriage or a holy family is not on the evil one's agenda. And whatever he can do to weaken us, even when we we could justify our anger, he can offer temptations to take it another step further, to say something that we deeply regret. I find it actually very helpful to go out of the room and to pray a St. Michael prayer and to call on my spouse's guardian angel and my guardian angel to start working, stepping up their work so that we can go back into conversation and have less conflict and more resolution. It's not that we think we're so important, we've drawn evil fire. It's every one of our souls matters. And the evil one is always, always going to be working on us in various ways. And we've just got to have our eyes open to understand that. Love and anger are passions that need self-control. They can be like fire. We talk about burning anger, in the heat of anger, anger kindled. I mean, that idea of it being a fire is in our language. What is the good it will accomplish? Now, we need righteous anger. There are things happening in our world. There may be things happening in your child's schoolroom or in relationships that require some anger, and it can have its place. But we have to be able to have anger without sin, and that's a challenge. Some people have a struggle with peace at any price versus a spouse who's always setting things straight. How do we navigate that for the healthiest relationship we can have? I have a whole chapter in Chosen and Cherished on how to fight fair. Now, they're the rules that Scott and I have hammered out, but we don't always follow them either, I don't ever want you to put us on a pedestal like, wow, if I could just have a marriage like the Hahns. I mean, God is at work, and He is my best friend, and we are finding a whole new level of sweetness with the kids gone. People are like, oh, you have an empty nest? I'm like, yeah. I welcome them home every time they can come home, but empty nest means that we're back to the two of us. It's very sweet. It's a very sweet time. We need to be aware of the dysfunctionality that we bring into marriage. I remember the phrase dysfunctional family got big about 20 years ago. We were on our large family vacation, and one of my sisters referred to another family and said, oh, they're so dysfunctional. And my mom smiled and said, we all are, honey. And she said, no, we're not dysfunctional. And my mom, again, just smiled sweetly and said, sweetheart, we are all fruit from the tree of Adam and Eve. Hopefully, we have less dysfunction. Hopefully, we'll identify things from our home of origin that are good, that should be duplicated, and that were not good and should not be duplicated. And we will have a tendency to sort of duplicate our family system, and so we need to be aware. And that's part of the blessing of coming to confession, the sacrament, getting that sacramental grace, coming to the Eucharist, coming to talks like this where you take and pray and think, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do? How can I change things? Reading books, maybe getting counseling. We need to take the sting of counseling out of it. Scott and I have benefited for years from different counselors for different situations. And it's a blessing. Often priests tell me, by the time anyone walks into their office for counseling, they're like ready to sign divorce papers. Don't get there. Don't do that. Don't wait that long. Go and get the assistance that you could possibly get. In fact, I've tried to challenge priests, and I put it in several books, and now I've got 2 sons studying for the priesthood, so I give them all my little ideas. You know how now you will sign up for wellness visits for babies. You don't wait till they're sick. You have planned wellness visits. Okay? Now we have wellness visits to the dentist. Again, why wait until you're in agony and pain? Maybe he can check, and by cleaning your teeth, he'll say, oh, you got some spots here that could become cavities. And more of us are able to keep our teeth because we've taken better care of our teeth. Why not, when you marry someone, say, now I want you to sign up with Gertrude, who's our secretary, and I want you to have 2 wellness visits scheduled for your first year of marriage. We'll meet at 4 months, and we'll meet at 8 months. And then the parish is going to put on, at our coffee, our monthly coffee, we're going to celebrate your first anniversary. Wouldn't it be great? We need support. We need you can read books till you are, your eyes are swimming, but until you are married, you do not know what you don't know. I remember it was our second night on our honeymoon. Now, I'm not going into detail, but we're laying there, and all of a sudden Scott goes, "Get out. Get out. Get out." Gosh, and I start crawling out of the bed, and he says, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm married to Psycho!" I burst into tears, so I'm like, "You just told me to get out of bed." He said, "What?" And I realized he was asleep when he said get out. And it was comical, but I'm telling you, at that moment, I thought, I have no clue who I'm married to, okay? We don't know what we don't know, and so we need to take advantage of what's available. There is so much I could say, so many proverbs I could quote you about our mouths. And I'll just throw out, let's see, okay, I've got like 3 minutes left. And only 3 pages left to my notes. Okay, Proverbs 10:19, when words are many, transgression is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is prudent. Every thought we have is not worth saying. It's a whole lot easier to not say something and not have to go through the whole process of forgiveness and hoping that he can forget what I said than just holding some of those thoughts in. Now, I'm not saying push everything down and don't share your emotions and just be the Blessed Mother when you're not yet there. But at the same time, a little space, the adage, make your words sweet, you never know when you'll have to eat them. It comes into play. Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. I love this. I give this to my sons. Proverbs 16:32, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. You want to be powerful, dear son? Keep your mouth closed. Think before you speak. Okay. Now, I took this not letting the sun go down on your wrath very, very seriously. And I think in our first 3 weeks of marriage, almost every night, I came to Scott, I was like, can I talk to you about something? Just feeling like I needed to clear the air. And after 3 weeks, he said to me, can you give it a rest? He said, you will not fix me in 3 weeks, okay? And I thought I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. Again, some of this is you have to learn to live with each other. Some of it is you have to differentiate between weaknesses and failings and actual deliberate sins. Some things need resolution, some don't. One of our rules about conflict resolution is look at the time. If it's already post-midnight, it's probably not going to be a good resolution. It can be a resolution to say, let's just say a quick prayer together, and we will talk tomorrow when we're both rested and we've eaten something. There is such a thing as hunger. Anger that comes from hunger. Who knows? Who knows? Okay. And I'll just give you this passage, a great passage for your families. James 1:19 and 20. My dad had us memorize this on a very lengthy trip. We had a 7-day car ride out to Washington State. There 2 weeks, 7 days back. Know this, my beloved brethren, let every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not work the righteousness of God. Many times he would say, something would happen in the car, and he'd say, okay, let's go over our Bible verse for the vacation. Let every man, that's great. Okay, forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. It's a matter of your will. You do not need to wait for the feelings. I wish, that was one of those concepts I wish my dad had explained to me when I was little. Because I was one of those kids who thought I had to feel like I had forgiven someone before I could say, I forgive you. My sister was a quick blow-up, blurt out whatever you're going to say, and then she'd feel terribly bad about it right afterwards and say, I'm sorry, please forgive me. And if I wasn't ready to forgive her right away, well, then she was mad again because I was not forgiving her, and it was just like, oh my gosh, I'll get back to you, I'll get back to you. I didn't realize that I could actually separate my feelings and extend forgiveness, say, I don't feel like I've forgiven you, but I do forgive you, and my feelings will follow. It might be something helpful to mention to your children. Okay.
Just keep going.
Just keep going. Okay. Because I want to get to sex. My life verse is Romans 12:1 and 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. And I'm going to quote verse 2 in a moment, but verse 1. We do not love God just with our spirits. We worship him with our bodies. We are called to be living sacrifices. And the joy in marriage is that we can have sexual intimacy. And the challenge is we can have sexual intimacy. I watch people on shows and news reports, and I think, you have no clue. You have no clue how rich and how beautiful sexual intimacy is in marriage. My dad still tells me, intimacy with your mom, it gets better every year. And they've been married 62 years, and he said, because I know her better. It isn't about getting some or getting it. It is giving and receiving each other. Our faith is so beautiful about this. Covenant is about I belong to you and you belong to me. And in marriage we have a covenant where we give ourselves completely, fully to the other. And in fact, it's an act of spiritual worship. Our children's needs will always be louder than our spouses. And when they're really tiny, you really have to really be very focused on that, but we cannot lose sight of the needs of our spouse. My husband will never have an affair because I have not given myself to him. I don't buy that. I don't believe that men can justify adultery on that basis. But I can tell you that intimacy, physical intimacy, is a crucial ministry in our marriage, especially such a sexualized culture. My dad reinforced the need for purity, both because he talked about how much strength it would give us, and that gift to give a future spouse and saying, I have saved myself for you. But then he also talked about how beautiful the sexual act was in marriage. My husband looks at me and says, your body says to me, you have loved me enough to bear my children. I have cuts, C-section cuts up and down and side to side. When I had Hannah, I couldn't believe the doctor came in and he said, well, we needed to do the cut down. And I'm like, you didn't just cut over the old one? He said she was transverse lie and I needed to cut differently to get her out. I just kind of looked at him and he said, just think of it like an anchor. Okay, that's what I want to see in the mirror every day, you know. I've got stretch marks, I've got bulges and, you know, places. And my husband says, I think that many of these are going to be marks on your resurrection body because you have done this for love of God. You have done this for the love of Christ. People will say sex is good. No, it's much better than good. Playing basketball is good. Or sex is great. No frosted flakes. Frosted flakes are great. Sex is holy. Sex is holy in marriage. Our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. We've been redeemed by the precious blood of our Savior, and we know to whom we belong. And in marriage, in that covenant commitment, in humility. We give ourselves to each other and we receive each other. You understand what contraception does? The life-giving sperm of a man, or we are damaging the sides of the uterus and trying to suppress what could be the life-giving egg of a woman. We are saying, I give myself to you, but not the life-giving part. And I receive you, but not the life-giving part. And I better not get pregnant. The marriage bed is to be undefiled. Children, how do we view children? Children are only and always a blessing. You cannot find a proverb in sacred scripture that talks about only have one or two because that's all the college education you can afford. Or make sure you have years between kids because then you won't be stuck double diapering or triple diapering, as one of my kids has had to do. Is it challenging? Absolutely. Is it even difficult to have so many sleepless nights? I mean, my daughter has a prolapsed bowel. She's got varicose veins. She's had sleep deprivation in pregnancy, and this is her 4th delivery in 6 years. And yet, she knows what a gift this new little girl is going to be to her family. That it is a limited time. If you think of your life, how much of your life are you married? Of your married life, how much of that time could you have a baby? Of the time that you could have a baby, how many times would you conceive? We have never done anything, once we came to a conviction against contraception as Protestants, and I wrote about it in Life Giving Love. When we came to a conviction against contraception, we threw it out. Scott said, maybe we should just leave it on the shelf. I'm like, it's right or wrong. It's wrong, we're throwing it out. We threw it out. We have been only open, so that would be going on 38 years, because we're going to be 40 years married this summer. 38 years of non-contraceptive love, and we only conceived 9 times. And we only got to raise 6 children. Was that you? I thought maybe I looked like that on. I got that right. Are you going to have a baby every year because you're open to life? Hardly anyone in the world has been blessed that way. But do you know that St. Catherine of Siena was the 25th child? The 25th child. Many died. But her mom and dad remained open. How rich is our life? Because they said yes. Same thing with St. Therese of Lisieux. I don't know what number she was, but a number of babies died at birth. I mean, how brutal is that? Most of us don't have a baby die at birth. And yet they continue to be open to life. We would not have St. Therese of Lisieux apart from that. I just want to challenge you to give yourselves more fully to that one to whom God has led you in the covenant of marriage, to embrace that vow deeply and realize this world is not a playground. It is a battleground. It is a battleground. And he is asking you to make a difference in this world and in our church with your yes. Your yes, I will follow you, Lord. Your yes to say, I want to be fully a gift to you. And I will give myself fully as a gift to my spouse. St. John Paul said this, merciful love is supremely indispensable between those who are closest to one another. Husbands and wives, parents and children, and dearest friends. Now, I have some things I want to share in the second talk about children, but I'm going to close with this comment from my granddaughter. She came bounding down the stairs, 4 years old, and said to her mom, today I want to be a saint. And my daughter-in-law said, okay. And she said, so, don't ask me to do anything I don't want to do, okay? So honest, so honest. I feel like that echoes my heart. I start out the day saying, Lord, I want to serve you. I want to do whatever you want me to do. I want to be a saint. And then it gets challenging and difficult, and it's like, well, no, don't ask me to do something I don't want to do. He does ask us to do things we don't want to do. But in the midst of it, He has mercy and grace to strengthen us, to give us what we need to keep saying this. Let's close in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Oh, gracious Lord, I thank you for the privilege of spending these moments together. I thank you that, in fact, you are asking us to be saints. You are calling us to be holy, to be like your Son, to be like his mother. Thank you for the grace that you give us through the sacraments in the church. And thank you, dear Lord, for those of us who are married, for the channel of grace and mercy in our lives and our spouse. May we be faithful, Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen.